The way this story was told to me was by a woman who was married to a police officer in Rehoboth, Massachusetts, and it goes something like this. A little bit of backstory. Anawan Rock is the historical site where Chief Anawan was captured, and that officially ended King Philip's War in the New England area. King Philip's War was so massive and so brutal that it is still known today as one of the deadliest wars in U.S. history. 5% of the entire New England population was massacred during this war, and it led to at least 3,000 Native American deaths and the deaths of some 500 plus English settlers. The Rock is well known for its supernatural activity. It's been published in many, many books, many, many newspaper articles, and because of that, it is prone to vandalism. It draws a lot of people out there in the hopes that they will witness one of the many paranormal occurrences that are reported each year. And Keaton Pen was one of those people. He was 16 years old when he and a group of his friends made plans to go to Anawan Rock. They took with them some flashlights and a backpack, some beer, and some spray paint. And according to the police interview with Keaton, the group had been drinking at the Rock for about 2 hours and they hadn't witnessed an event. They started to get bored, and that's when one of his friends suggested that they spray paint the Rock. They thought it would be funny to paint skulls and crossbones as warning signs to others that would venture out that way. They took out their spray cans and began to vandalize the Rock, which is known to be a deeply spiritual location to the local Native Americans. Keaton reported that they'd been spray painting the Rock for approximately 10 to 15 minutes when another group of people came out to the Rock. One of them must have called the Rehoboth Police Department, concluded Keaton, because within minutes, 4 officers came walking out of the woods with dogs and flashlights. Keaton and his friends began to run, which is when Keaton fell, injuring his knee, and Officer J. Washington arrested him. Officer Washington brought Keaton Pen to the police department and put him in a holding cell, and, as is required by law, Keaton was placed in the cell alone because he was a minor. These are the events that occurred next, according to my source. Keaton was mumbling incoherently, and he began speaking as if there was someone on the bench opposite of where he was sitting. He kept asking, "Who are you? Why are you looking at me like that? What'd you say? Speak up." And he was becoming increasingly belligerent. Officer Washington went into the cell repeatedly and told Keaton to simmer down. The boy was clearly intoxicated. It was then advised that a doctor be called in to check on Keaton Pen to determine if drugs were also involved in his system. While waiting for the doctor to arrive, Keaton became more and more upset. He was screaming, "Look at me! What are you going to do about it?" over and over again, when suddenly Keaton stood up and he began to stumble backwards into the corner of his cell. Officer Washington again went to the cell to check on Keaton. It was noted that he was acting agitated as he moved into the corner and he began screaming, "No, no," and extending his arms out in front of him as if to push something away. Officer Washington unlocked the cell and was adamantly ordering Keaton to sit down, when suddenly the boy began crying and screaming out in pain while yelling that he would never do it again. He began clutching at his chest and he fell to the ground. The doctor had just entered the station and immediately ran to Keaton's aid, but there was no pulse. As the doctor opened Keaton's shirt and began CPR, he noticed then, as did Officer Washington, that there was a distinct burn on Keaton's skin. It was already blistering and was in the exact shape of a right handprint. There was no explanation for either the burn nor why Keaton Pen, a healthy 16-year-old boy, suddenly died of a massive heart attack. When the tapes from the security camera were played in court, one could clearly see a dark figure sitting on the bench across from Keaton. It was a man who appeared to have long, straight hair. It also looked as though he were possibly wearing buckskin pants, and also possibly a blanket around his shoulders. He appeared to be looking down throughout most of the recording, but suddenly this figure stood up. And just after it did, Keaton stood up and began walking backwards into the corner of the cell. The figure dropped what was around his shoulders, but it could not be seen hitting the floor. It appeared as though it just vanished as it fell. The dark figure walked over to Keaton Pen, and while Keaton's arms were extended outright, the figure raised one hand, his right hand, and he placed it on Keaton's chest. Officer Washington and Dr. Marley are also seen clearly in the video as the figure stood between them as they tried to save Keaton's life. Then, suddenly, there is no longer a figure in the video.